Thank you very much, Betty, for that lovely introduction. And what I'm going to be talking about today specifically is an issue which is bugging us at Saros about recruitment for qualitative research, because that's what we do. Things are changing in the industry. We want to roll with the trends, but some of them are harder to take on than others. Whether market research is old or new, we still have qualitative research and quantitative research. Two very different disciplines and approaches with different end goals, usually involving different practitioners and projects. And from a recruitment point of view, we're generally involved in the former. But of course, combined approaches yield multidimensional insight, and from a fieldwork supplier point of view, that's a great thing to be part of. The problem, however, sometimes lies when the defining parameters for the two become conflated and tools are used in the wrong way. And I'm talking specifically about the use of quantitative tools and algorithms to define the recruitment of participants for qualitative research. Now, usually qualitative research recruitment is defined in terms of the demographics, attitudes, and behaviours of the desired participants, from which appropriate screening questions, including probing real-time interview questions, can be derived to make a robustly scalable yet human process of selection. But nowadays, all too frequently, we encounter briefs including the condition that the selected participants have to pass through a bespoke quantitative algorithm, something which is usually highly confidential intellectual property of the end client, and the recruitment supplier is expected to be able to provide costing and viability on the project without any meaningful knowledge of what the screening criteria really are. Of course, if we're given an unlocked tool with clear question weightings and routing, we can usually incorporate that into our screening process and be clear about the incidents for the different profiles with no problem. However, all too often, despite pleading and volunteering a range of NDAs signed in blood or whatever else, we're supplied with a Blackbox Tool instead. Generally, this comes in some weird ancient version of Excel which nobody can open and has macros which trip warnings all over the system. It's impossible to reverse engineer it in any way, and there's no way of checking claimed incidence rates against the reality. We just get told to recruit those who screen in as Profile 1, for example. It might take 20 minutes to run through the questions, and when you're testing it yourself, wondering how to cost this project, it can be impossible to get it to generate the same question and response set twice. Now, this thing we're given might be a highly robust tool for working with large populations. So if you were sampling 10,000 or 100,000 respondents in a survey, you'd expect to find a good representative number of them clustering nicely in the middle of the bell curve like this, with those in the middle here very typically representative of the attitudes or behaviours which combine to define whatever Profile 1 is really all about. We don't need to know what that is, actually, to apply the tool correctly. But the problem is, if we're recruiting a handful of depth interviews or a focus group of 8 people from it, the probability maths doesn't work in the same way. They're real people, they're not AI chatbots, like insights we're talking about earlier, and their behaviour is going to be unusual. The problem is when we're recruiting like this, we have no idea why participant B is so much more Profile 1-ish than participant A, for example. We could recruit you an entire group randomly from point C on the curve, quite possible when we're talking about low numbers. We could recruit A's and C's and a few B's, they won't have anything in common. All of these people screen through just fine with the lock tool we're given, and they could all be random outliers. The small numbers involved make less typical fits far more likely to occur. Because if we have no idea what actually defines those typing out as Profile 1 in a qualitative way, then we don't know they're outliers, and we've no common sense framework to check that against. And without that information, our trained and experienced recruitment interviewers can't exercise their judgment effectively because they have nothing to judge against. All we know is that the client comes back and says, well, they didn't feel very representative of Profile 1, so that recruitment wasn't very good. And the worst of it is, neither us recruiters nor the researchers, nor really even the client, know why it wasn't that good. Now, this difficulty isn't limited to bespoke client segmentations. Any big quant tool used alone is far too blunt an instrument for good qualitative recruitment. For example, demographic tools like Experian's Mosaic or CACI's ACON segmentation in the UK and similar global databases. These are valuable tools for direct marketers and also for quantitative researchers looking to identify trends and preferences right down to neighbourhood level. But again, they work on aggregations of large samples and might tell you very little about individual households in the real world. According to Mosaic, applied to the address of the last house I bought in the UK, I'm probably a C2 empty nester with an occupational pension, a penchant for satellite TV, and a high probability of purchasing Morrison's ready meals, apparently. If somebody recruited me to a focus group based on that alone, they'd be very disappointed with the outcome. Now, of course, these tools are rarely used in isolation, and hopefully there would be other screening questions involved related to whatever the project was actually about. But it's the same principle. And of course now, when we see something like this in a recruitment brief, it's a signal for us to go and research what this actually means, and then screen for that instead during the recruitment. Because if a researcher says they want people living in Acorn Type 7 postal sectors only, we know that what they probably really want are certain types of affluent professionals who are most likely to live in those postal sectors according to the given algorithm. It's rarely anything to do with the geography of where they actually live. Now, incidentally, these demographic icons overlaid on the map above are my own random segmentation indicators to make a nice webinar slide. It's not intended to comment specifically on the population of Tyneside and any associated characteristics they may have. But this kind of automated decision making also has potential implications for participants under the Data Protection Act. Whilst people moan at us all the time about not getting selected for paid research events, we can normally confidently defend this in the interests of our clients. We as recruiters are applying a known bank of selection criteria manually and purposefully in order to fulfill our contract to our research clients. I'm not aware of any case law in this area, but if automated tools are done, then any unsuccessful participant could demand that that's reviewed manually as part of a subject access request. And it may not be possible to comply with this appropriately at the recruitment company level if we don't even know what recruitment criteria are being applied. And census data, whilst even more comprehensive as a data set, is even more out of date. In the UK, the ONS gives us a snapshot of demographics during a few specific days, which last took place over 6 years ago. Given the way the world has changed since 2011, you can bet a lot of local demographics have also changed. This has been known to backfire dramatically in recruitment, particularly in urban areas of high mobility and recent gentrification. You've recruited us a load of hipster yuppies who've only been here 5 minutes. That wasn't what we wanted at all, was one researcher's response, when all they'd actually told us was to recruit by age in a specific electoral ward. Now, defining a sample as being the opposite of hipster yuppies would have been a good example of the kind of qualitative criteria we could have better worked with. London in particular is a great example where demographic tools like this don't work well, given a rapidly changing demographic makeup and high mobility, as well as extensive planning regulations that specifically counter natural socioeconomic segmentation by requiring fixed numbers of social or affordable housing to be included in new developments of a certain size, for example. So, what does a qualitative participant recruiter need to do a good job? This probably won't come as any great surprise. We need qualitative criteria. Okay, so the demographics are likely to be pretty quanty. We do need to know who you want in terms of location, life stage, occupation, and so on. But when very small numbers are involved, generalizing from this to specific behaviours and attitudes is far too risky, so we need to define those issues in qualitative terms. What do these people do? Why do they do it? How do they feel about that? How strongly do they agree or disagree with your descriptions? What really makes them tick? And what would a truly uber consumer, a really outstandingly typical participant be like? We might not find you a whole room full of such archetypes and you might not want them, but to know what they look and feel like really matters. Conversely, what would your nightmare participant be defined as? What factors should rule out the wrong person fast? Because when you hire a qualitative recruitment agency, you're paying for the expertise of specialist interviewers and project managers with a wealth of experience in judging those shades of grey, in identifying the best fits from the weakest links, and in bringing their human discernment to a recruitment decision to screen a participant in or out. Frankly, it's a waste of your budget to have them crunch through a bank of 20 verbatim questions in a spreadsheet and then spit out a typology at the end of it, or to stick postcodes into a database. Instead, why not use words and conversation and repeated dialogue to paint us a picture of your perfect participant? And let us do our thing with that the way we know best, so that you can generate your qualitative insights at the end of the day. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.